Hello and welcome back to my booktube channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. I'm Vanessa, also known as Nessa Reads Books on Instagram, and this is going to be a short compilation of my favorite reads from 2023. So I have read 23 books this year, and I was aiming for 25. We still got about 2 weeks left, so we will see if that happens. And out of those 23 books, I have 6 reads that were my favorite, and then 2 that I predict might be amongst that favorite group, if assuming I finish them by this year. So, no further ado, let's get into it. The first book I have for you, I read in January, and I'm pulling up my story graph so I can see when I finished it. So I finished this book pretty early on in the year. I finished this by January 2nd, and this is a book that has been praised by R.F. Kuang, Genevieve Gornichek, Shelley Parker Chan, Roshani Chokshi, Lucy Holland, and S.A. Chakraborty. So a lot of authors giving this praise, and it is a myth retelling from an Indian epic. And if you have not already guessed this 5-star read from me, this is Kaiki by Vaishnavi Patel, and this book set the bar really, really high for the beginning of the year. I believe I started this sometime in like late December of last year, and then it just crossed over into January. But this was a really, really awesome start for the year. And if you know me, you know I love mythology retellings, especially centered on the women of the original myths that kind of get overlooked or shoved into one particular mold. And so I felt like this was a very mold-breaking read. And if you're kind of getting a little worried already, you do not have to have an expert's knowledge on the Ramayana to enjoy this. The only background that you really need to know is that Kaikeyi is one of the wives of the king, and so she's kind of the evil stepmother of the epic hero whose name is Rama. And so this was just one of my favorite reads, and we started off the year really, really strong with this one, especially given that mythology and retellings is one of my favorite genres. And I felt like Patel did she just did an amazing job with this character and her characterization, her backstory, and just giving her a lot more depth and fleshing her out compared to how she's typically treated in the Ramayana. So, 5-star read, started off the year really strong, and even though it might seem like something that's kind of scary, definitely not the shortest of books, about 475 pages or so, I still say give this one a shot. Open yourself up to this Indian epic reimagining, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. The next book I have for you is, quite frankly, one of the biggest books of this year, so it's probably no surprise that it's amongst one of my favorites. So I finished this book by January 8th, so finishing Kaikeyi by January 2nd, and then cramming this huge thing in before I went back to school was no joke, but was 100% worth it. All 556 pages of it. And so this was a historical fiction with a little hint of some fantasy, and it really brings up some important conversations about colonialism, the impact of it, talking about language and culture, and etc. If you have not figured it out yet, Babel by R.F. Kuang, or The History of the Oxford Translators, Revolution, and the Necessity of Violence. So this was just a beast to read. I cannot lie to you there. With some of the formatting, it reminded me of the history papers that I was writing and reading from in my fall senior thesis class. It reminded me of the Chicago style with some footnotes. But I do think, even though this is very intimidating to look at, it can be intimidating to read, I still think it's a really important book, and the different accolades it's gotten since its publication. I think they are 100% worth it. This is different, I think, than what R.F. Kuang initially did with her Poppy War trilogy. I'm still waiting on the mental strength to do that one. But, I mean, this is quite simply, I think Rebecca Roanhorse, she said it best. This is a masterpiece. It left me completely speechless after I read it. And it was like I just sat back and it was all I could do to just think about all those thoughts swirling in my head after I had read it. And so, if you've been on the fence about reading this one, just do it. There's some paperbacks out now, so it's a lot cheaper than the hardbacks, and I think this is a really important read, especially considering a lot of these world events going on right now, and understanding colonialism from a non-Western perspective and the impact it's had on the colonized nations and countries. So, a really important read, and if you've been scared of it, definitely, it's worth it, 100%. Go ahead, just bite the bullet and give it a shot. I think, even if you think it's a hard read, I think you will gain a lot of important insight and knowledge from it. So the next read I have for you is a book I did not really start reading until about August. And so with student teaching, preparing to be a teacher, college softball in the spring, I was just really, really busy through all of those months. And so I didn't really get to start picking up my reading again until I was teaching. And so the first 15-20 minutes of my classes, my students will read a book that they select by themselves. And so to encourage the behavior of reading in class, I actually would read my own books while I was with them. And so this is one of those books, and this is also a book that has been, I think, pretty popular in the literary fiction kind of genre. This is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. And so I actually got an ARC of this one. That's why it's a really cool floppy paperback. But still the really beautiful, noticeable, and identifiable cover of Marcellus the octopus and Tova Sullivan, the main characters of this book. And this is a little bit more lit fic and contemporary fiction. But even though it is a good bit different than some of the other really favorite reads of the year, I thought it was a really emotional and a reflection for me to read, and it was a very sweet novel. There's a lot of some sad stuff, there's some really happy, heartwarming stuff, and then altogether you have a really emotional read out of it. And so if you're kind of more into literary fiction and you want something that's probably going to make you cry, but a happy cry, I think this is a really good book for you. This is another 5-star read. All three of these books so far have been 5-star reads for me, for their different reasons that they were special in their own way. And so this one, it's a bit different. So you don't have these young protagonists. These are older folks, and of course Marcellus and octopus. So you have a hint of some whimsical in there, but also the really touching and heartwarming protagonists that I think it blends together really, really well and creates a very unique reading experience while not being fantastical, but still having some of the whimsy mixed in with it. So a really beautiful, heartwarming read that I think most people would probably enjoy. So, totally different genre here. This book is a book that I kind of binge read in a few scattered days, kind of throughout September and October. So according to my story graph, I finished this in September 28th. And so along with my grad school stuff and teaching, this was a book that I would sometimes get to read with my kids at school, or kind of binge read a few scattered days at home. But this is a dark academia book, And if you are into kind of a murder mystery, friend groups breaking down, falling apart, spiraling, Shakespearean stuff, Shakespearean actor, and then of course dark academia, then this is a book for you. This is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, and I had heard a whole lot of really awesome feedback on this book, and I was not fully like sure how I was going to take it, but I'm really glad I took a chance on the kind of this dark academia genre. I read the Atlas 6 about a year or two ago, and it just didn't quite do it for me. And so I kind of sworn off the dark academia genre for a little bit. And then I decided to pick this up, and I loved it. I'm not a really big Shakespeare nerd, but you don't need an expert's knowledge. You don't need a PhD in Shakespeare to enjoy this book. I really enjoyed the something as simple as the formatting being in almost like a play with act 1, 2, and 3, and then scene 1 through scene 10 or however many were in each act of the book. And I really enjoyed how M.L. Rio ties in these Shakespearean plays and dramas, and how the characters reflect all these different characters traditionally shown in Shakespearean tragedies. All in all, it was a fascinating read, and it was addictively good, but to the point that it was impossible to tear this book out of my hands. I wasn't going to put it down until I wanted to put it down. And so it was definitely kind of chaotic how I ended up reading it, but it was just such a wonderful, wonderful read. And if you are into the dark academia genre and you haven't gotten to this book yet, I highly, highly suggest this one. I really recommend it. Even if you're a little scared of the Shakespearean stuff, I don't think it's enough to warrant not giving this book a chance. So, another 5-star read from me. And then going to another different genre. This is a book that I started in September after I finished If We Were Villains, and I finished by October 5th. I was kind of torn between about like a 4.5 to a 5-star rating on this book. I have heard varying feedback on this one. This was chosen to be a part of Reese's Book Club, and this has definitely been another it book of the year, and lots of praise for this book, but a lot of important conversations stemming from this book as well. And if you've not figured out based on that description yet, this is R.F. Kuang's Yellowface, and I was completely just blown away by this book. I know there are some people who kind of felt the same way, like, wow, this book was just so amazing. And then I have heard some feedback, particularly from like people of color, saying, we've been saying this type of stuff all along. And I kind of went along with that feedback as well. But what I appreciated from this, I enjoyed kind of getting a peek behind the curtain on the publishing industry, how a bestseller is made, and how that was written out in the book. And then also the treatment of minority authors versus perhaps, like June, a white author who maybe doesn't need to be telling that story. And so, as someone who is a history major, I think it made me sit back and reflect on who has a right to tell certain stories, who should be the one being in the spotlight. How can you trust this person to be really giving nuanced takes on important pieces of history? And so it really makes you sit back and reflect. And then I was just completely enamored with R.F. Kuang's writing in this novel. So it's not the prettiest prose, and it's not like reading what her fantasy novels, what I assumed they would be like, what the historical fantasy novels would read, or how Babel reads. You can't compare apples to oranges. Like, Babel and Yellowface are serving some very important purposes, but that doesn't mean that they are exactly the same. So just like how I recommend readers, if you're going to read The Song of Achilles and Circe by Madeline Miller, don't compare the two. Don't read one and expect the other to be just a slightly different character, but same type of story. It's not like that. There are two different purposes for those novels and two different characters, two different stories. And I think that's the deal with Yellowface that might make some sense out of that critique. I think some people might go into it expecting another Babel, and it's not. It's meant to be the voice of a character who was a mediocre white author and got away with a lot and spun everything around to be the victim in every single situation. So I think it's not the most amazing book in the writing itself, but I think that was on purpose. It's because of who that character is. It's not supposed to be the most amazing writing or book that you've ever read. It makes you think, that is that character's voice. This is June's voice. So I thought it was a really good read. I think the talent to make this type of book with that style of voice, including the aspects of the publishing industry that is kind of kept hidden from the general public, and then to show the reasoning behind this character's motivations and her actions. I think that was an incredibly talented piece of writing, and so I gotta give credit where credit is due, and so for those reasons, this was one of my favorite books of the year. And so, again, I'm kind of torn on the rating, about like a 4.5 to a 5, kind of in that range. I don't think I ever gave it an official rating, but I think it's too good of a book to not include in this video. And the last finished book I have for you in this video, this was actually a book that I read for my American Lit class, and we read a lot of Black authors, queer authors, and kind of about 20th century, 21st century authors. And so this is one of those books. This is called Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward. This was published in 2011, and it is a Hurricane Katrina novel. And so to read this at a time that I would not have read this at the time of publication. I was only 11. So to read this from that point of view in that time period, as Jesmyn Ward lived through Hurricane Katrina and experienced that, this made for a really powerful novel, and it makes sense why it won the National Book Award. At the time, the copy I borrowed from the library, it didn't have the sticker on it, so I didn't know it had won the National Book Award until after the fact. And I just thought it was a beautifully written novel. I connected a lot to it, and so this is actually about a family in rural Mississippi, and the main character, her name is Esh, and she finds out that she's pregnant, and she's a 15-year-old Black girl, and her family's just trying to prepare for the storm, and the novel takes place over 12 days, so preparing for the storm hitting their town, and then like about a day or two after the storm. And so a really powerful Southern lit novel, kind of contemporary, but I think at this point it's been about 2011, we're in 2023. It's been over 10 years, so at this point you could consider it historical fiction, but at the time it was pretty close to contemporary because Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005. So this was an author that was not on my radar before, and I'm definitely planning on reading some more books by her because I know she is still writing, and she had a few recent releases in the past few years, and I will be catching up on some lost ground and trying to read some more of her books, especially after how much I loved Salvage the Bones. So this was another 5-star read for me. And then these are my two current reads that, should I finish them this year, I think they will be amongst my favorite reads of the year. And so I'm going to start with one that I actually started in February. I received this book a little early for Valentine's Day, and actually it was from the same family friend who gifted me Babel. So, love you. Thank you. And this is a story that takes place in the Caribbean, about a year or a few years after slavery had been abolished in the Caribbean. But this takes place in Barbados. And a mother goes looking for her children that they've all been separated from one another and taken to various places, all in the Caribbean. And so she's just doing her best to go find her 5 children that have all been separated from her and from each other. And this is River Sing Me Home by Eleanor Scherer. This was published in 2023, so earlier this year. And I remember seeing this on a list for Black History Month reads, and I was just immediately hooked. I saw that premise, and I thought, I've never really read books set in historical Caribbean islands. And so I wanted to give this one a chance, and I can remember being really into it as I was reading, but then my life got busy. I got busy with college softball and student teaching. It really ramped up, and so I found myself not having as much time to read, and so I had to put this down for a really, really long time. And it was not due to not liking the book. I want to make sure that is abundantly clear. I think this is a fantastic book. I just got so busy. I did not have the time to read. Any free time I had was spent resting or just trying to keep up with the amount of work I had to do. And so I got about 75% through with this book, and as the year has started coming to a close, I realized this was a really good book, and I really wanted to finish it. And being about 75% through, I'm probably about here or so, I was like, it's worth it to go ahead and pick it back up, even if I'm going to be a little clueless for a few chapters getting back into it. And some stroke of luck I had. I ended up picking back up on a chapter that gave like a short recap of everything that had happened in all these previous chapters, about where the mother had gone and which children, what happened to them, what she found out about them, and where she was heading. So it turned out being awesome that I picked it back up, and I think with the amount of days I have left, I can probably finish this by the end of the year. And I highly recommend this book, and I do know at the end, I'm going to try not to spoil anything for myself, but there are some author's notes about this story and what inspired her to do this. And so she was born and raised in England, but she has a strong attachment to Caribbean history. And so this story of a mother searching for her children is based on a true story, and so she talks about her researching experience. And so I haven't read all of the author's notes. I kind of just skimmed through them, but I think this is a really fascinating book, and I can't believe there haven't been more Caribbean lit books that I've heard of until now. So I'm hoping this will be between a 4.5 to 5-star read for me once I am finished with it, and hopefully by the end of this year I can tell you what I'll rate it. And then the last book that I have for you tonight is another current read. I actually mentioned this in my previous video. It is a Greek mythology retelling, and it is focused on one of the female characters from the Iliad. This is Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. And so you might can see my sticky note. I am about 50 pages in, and it's a very thick book. This is about 475 pages maybe, and so I don't know if I will realistically be able to finish it this year, but if I should finish it this year, I feel like I can safely predict it will be one of my favorites. I am loving this book. I think it's very beautifully written. It's written in third person, which I wasn't expecting particularly, but I think it's worked out really well. It's beautifully written. The novel, it's like the writing itself is very pretty. And I'm really enjoying this background knowledge that I'm getting to learn about Clytemnestra, because really I didn't know a whole lot about her. All I knew was that she was the sister of Helen and the wife of Agamemnon, and so those are all characters in the Iliad, both of whom get a lot more of the spotlight than Clytemnestra does. And so this has been a really interesting read to feel this character much more fleshed out than she gets to be in the Iliad. And just in general, I love Greek mythology. I love Greek mythology retellings. I love seeing authors take spins on these classic tales and finding new ways to tell the same story but with different characters, and getting to create more depth to these characters. So definitely one of my favorite reads so far, and we shall see if I can finish this by the end of the year. I'm hoping I can, because I want this to be a part of my 2023 reads. So that is all I have for you tonight. I hope maybe you found something new that you would like to read going into the new year, or maybe we share some of our favorites from this year. If you have any recommendations that you think I would like to read and want to help me fill out my TBR for 2024, please feel free, leave a comment. I would love to get some more book recs. I've kind of been in a little bit of a TBR slump. I want to get in more Hispanic stories, and not just Mexico. I want to get into South American lit as well. So if you have any recs for authors from that area, or particularly historical fiction or myth books from those cultures and stuff, and from those authors, I am all ears, because that is an area that I know I am lacking and that I need to read more of. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you all in the next one.